It's a beautiful afternoon here in Kentucky. Hi, I'm Michelle Massey with Operation Parent, and I'm excited today to be your host. And I warmly welcome you to join us for our program today. First, I'd like to walk you through our features for Webinar Geek. You're going to get a recording of this webinar, and the recording will be sent out by email in the next 5 hours. You're also going to get a certificate of attendance. For those of you that are joining us live, you will receive this certificate within the next 24 hours or sooner, which will be sent to you in a separate email from the recording. Just make sure that you're checking the email that you registered with. You will get a survey, a very brief one that's going to pop up directly after the webinar today. It's only going to take you about 2 minutes to complete. Your continued support and encouragement and constructive feedback are so appreciated. Every word is utilized, and you're helping us to build this webinar community. If you missed the survey, it will also be emailed to you in the email with the recording. The handouts today are awesome, and they were sent to you yesterday in an email, but you can also pull those down live. If you check your screen, you're going to see a button to view the handouts. For those of you that are joining us on your phones, scroll down a bit to see that button to download the handouts while you're here. We have a private chat today, so each attendee, you will be muted during the presentation. However, we can't wait to hear from you in the chat section. You can send comments and questions that you have for our presenters today, and they're going to come privately. This is our new mission, which I'm so excited to share here first. We are empowering parents and caregivers to have casual, courageous conversations with their children. You can quick register here for our next webinars, and I'm super excited to let you know the October registration has just now gone live. So you'll be the first ones to register for Driving at Home, Empowering You to Step into Responsibility with SAD. You can also join us in September to talk about teen mental health with Minding Your Mind. Today, we're going to talk early and talk often. Prevent underage substance use with Dr. Robert Turrisi, Megan Carter, and Ann Ray from the University of Kentucky. I'm super excited to introduce you to Megan Carter. She is, I've had the opportunity to know her for a long time, and it's been amazing to watch her advance in MAD. She is now the Senior Director of Development and Fundraising and a wonderful human being. I'm excited for you to learn more from her about MAD today and her reason why she has chosen to work at MAD.
Thank you so much, Michelle, for that kind introduction, and it has been a pleasure working with you, and so excited to be part of this webinar today with Operation Parent. As Michelle mentioned, my name is Megan Carter, and I have the honor of serving Mothers Against Drunk Driving as the Senior Director of Development and Fundraising. I have been with the organization for 17 years and am just proud to be able to work for an organization that is doing incredible work throughout our communities. To start, I'll give a brief overview of Mothers Against Drunk Driving. So we are thrilled that we are actually celebrating our 45th anniversary this year. So it has been a lot of hard work that we've done through the years, but we still know that there's a lot of work to be done. So our mission is to end drunk and drugged driving, to support the victims of these violent crimes, and to prevent underage substance use and other drug use. We are an organization of men, women, and youth of all ages. We are victim survivors. We are traffic safety advocates, law enforcement, parents, caring adults, and members of the community, all working together to keep our community safe. What we always start with whenever we do a presentation is a mission moment. And as you can see on this slide, there is a link to a mission moment that we have from a victim and survivor that was very kind and generous in giving of themselves and sharing their stories. So we encourage everyone after the webinar to please visit and listen into the why we do the work that we do on a continuous basis. So what exactly does MAD do? We do a lot of things. So first and foremost, we are a victim services organization. We provide direct support services to the victims and survivors of impaired driving crashes. This can be from the very moment that they receive the news up until years down the road. This includes emotional support, where we are able to guide them as well as connect them with others who've experienced the same trauma. In addition, we provide resources to the community, whatever it may be that they are in need of. And one of the biggest ways that we support victims and survivors is through the criminal justice process. So oftentimes after the crash happens, not only are victims and survivors, walking through life and learning their new world after their loved one has been killed, or they themselves or their loved one has been injured, but there's a criminal justice process that happens afterwards. So we guide them through that, let them know what their rights are as victims, and simply sit in the courtroom as a hand to hold and a support, knowing that that is an extremely stressful and traumatic experience as well in their healing. So all these services are provided to them at no charge. In addition, we focus a lot of our work on impaired driving prevention through our prevention programs, which include our victim impact panel programs, as well as our law enforcement support initiatives, where we know that they are the heroes on our roadways, removing impaired drivers, as well as protecting our communities and keeping our roadways safe. And last, but certainly not least, is our underage substance use prevention programming, where we have a lot of focuses, where we have a lot of different audiences that we talk to. So we have our Power of Parents program, which we will be diving into shortly here with Dr. Robert Turrisi, where this is a program where we provide a handbook for parents and caring adults on starting the conversation and continuing the conversation when it comes to underage substance use. In addition, we have Power of Youth, which is our middle school and high school primary program, Power of Me, which is our elementary school program, as well as our new intervention programs, MADS Promposal and MAD Spirit, both focused on two very exciting times of the year for youth, specifically in the high school audience. So juniors and seniors with MADS Promposal as they gear up for prom, and MAD Spirit, which is our homecoming intervention program, which is focused for all schools. So at this time, it is my pleasure to be able to introduce Dr. Robert Turrisi, who has been an amazing partner with Mothers Against Drunk Driving in building and developing our Power of Parents program based off of the work and the research that he had done for many, many years when it comes to parents and caring adults, having the vital conversation with the youth in their lives, as well as the research behind underage drinking, the dangers associated with it, and the science behind it. So without further ado, it's my pleasure to welcome Dr. Turrisi.
Thank you, Megan. I really appreciate any time that I get a chance to present with you or do something like this. I want to start my part of the presentation and webinar by thanking the people that have volunteered and the people that work for Mothers Against Drunk Driving, that I'll refer to as MAD. I've been affiliated with MAD as a scientific advisor, and then a person that's been involved in helping and develop prevention programs nationally for almost 20 years now. And I call them my heroes for a reason. They take the best science from world leaders and then they translate that to action. And so I want to give a shout out to their victim services, because as Megan said, all these services are provided to the people that they work with at no cost, which today it's really hard to do. And they also provide the sources of prevention materials to families at no or really minimal cost. So they really are leaders. And I know that we've reached to close to 1 million homes with some of the prevention efforts we've done together. So I think they're amazing. I just want to share that with you. Okay, thank you, Megan. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the science that we know, and I'll put it into what we call kitchen table language so that it doesn't sort of bother anybody. But really, before I start on covering these key takeaways and going to this, I want to say that this is a massive team effort. The work that we've been doing has spanned well over 30 years. It encompasses national and international leaders on the topic. including people that were trained in through the course of these projects who are now professors that are working on this on their own or in collaboration with our team here at Penn State. And so anything that I'm going to talk about today, it comes from one of our studies or one of our colleagues' studies. And they don't really represent my opinions, which I could share when we get to the Q&A part of our talk. So with that, we're going to be talking about the problems and consequences of underage drinking, the big role that parents have and adults have in preventing this from occurring, and the problems such as riding with an impaired driver or getting in a car and driving themselves. And what we could do today, like as soon as we finish tomorrow, and then what we could do in the future to keep our kids and everybody that shares the roads with them safe. Next. So we hear a lot about other substances, for example, opioids, which is quite scary to be honest with you, and methamphetamines and cannabis and so on. But alcohol is still the #1 most used substance by youth and most of the people that are living in America. It's the drug that most likely to have been initiated early on. And I have a good colleague of mine in Pittsburgh, Dr. John Donovan. When he talks about by the end of 6th grade, he looks at underage drinking. He talks about 2nd and 3rd and 4th graders drinking. But by the time individuals reach high school in their 12th grade, many of them have reported that they started earlier. Next. And while alcohol by its own right has problems that we'll live with in our physical, it affects our brain, it affects our heart, it affects our liver, it affects our kidney, it affects almost every organ in our body, there are other consequences of drinking too. The kids who start drinking early are 7 times more. And when I say that, that means if you think about all the individuals that are out there getting in a car, they are at the highest risk relative to the proportions of them driving. And high schoolers that use alcohol or other substances are 5 times more likely not to finish school, which comes with other problems. Adolescent drinkers will also experience social problems in their social development, serious psychological problems like depression, and that includes suicidal thoughts. And they'll also be either victims of violence or perpetrators of violence. So these are not small consequences. Why do youth drink? Well, the #1 factor is peer pressure, social pressures, and these come in all different forms. Sometimes it's getting handed a drink by a peer, and other times it's that they see their friends that are involved in alcohol and they feel like if they don't drink, they won't fit in and so on. Sometimes younger people tell us that it makes them feel more like an adult because they see adults drinking. The media has an influence. And generally speaking, if you ask teenagers, they'll overestimate the number of their friends that drink. They think everyone's drinking. Next. By the time individuals get between 15 and 18, things get more serious, if you can imagine that. They generally have older friends, which then create peer influences. They're now at a driving age and they have access to cars. Generally, as kids get older and they become adolescents at this point, these are the times where they have less supervision by parents and adults. And that's what I mean by reduced social controls on their time. They've increased access and availability. Even though we have a drinking age of 21, kids tell us that they don't have any problems getting access to alcohol. And the last but not least, they're now willing to experience and drink alcohol. That graph shows that 3 out of 4 teenagers by the time they reach high school are drinking regularly. And it starts earlier in 8th grade where almost 1 in 2 are drinking. Next. When we say drinking, I want to kind of define that a little bit. When young people drink, they don't have a glass of wine or a beer and then talk about the state of America and politics and things like that. Usually they drink to get drunk. And we call it binge drinking or heavy episodic drinking. And that's when they drink 4 or 5 more drinks within an hour period of time or 2 hours in a period of time. That seems like a lot, but there's another type of drinking they engage in as well. It's called high intensity drinking, and when they drink twice that amount. And the more they drink, the more problems they have. One of the problems that young people experience, again, because they're young and their brain's not fully developed, is they experience something called alcohol-related blackouts. And this is not when they pass out from drinking, but rather they're still awake and their body's functioning, but their brain shifts resources away from forming memories to keeping them alive and breathing. And binge drinkers are more likely to do things like I mentioned earlier, be victims of violence or perpetrators of violence. They're much more likely to have unwanted sexual experiences and sexual assaults. They're more likely to be seriously injured in falls or fights. They're much more likely to be drunk drivers, or they're being individuals who get in a car with a drinking driver. So these are serious problems that our young people face. Even if you don't know somebody who's experienced that problem, that means that there's many, many people more that are. Next. Alcohol is not the only thing that we also study and we look at. We also are interested in cannabis, or sometimes called marijuana or pot or things like that. With the legality of cannabis in many states now in various forms, there's different formats. So it used to be that people got cannabis or marijuana from a dealer, some person that they knew that had access to it. And usually it came in a form that you roll it into a joint and smoke it. But now it's available in candies, liquids, all different formats. And a lot of these formats look like candy and they look like kids' things. The other part about cannabis is it's gotten much, much, much stronger. In the last 30 years, it's almost 4 times the strength or 5 times the strength. And so with that, there was always a perception that cannabis wasn't really as harmful as alcohol. And that's not really true. So a beer 30 years ago still had the same amount of alcohol in it roughly that it does now. But cannabis has increased its potency from 2 to 4% THC to sometimes as much as 30% if it's in a leaf form, and 90% if it's in an oil-based form. Some of the things that we've noticed, some of the science, is that teens that ingest cannabis in its various forms, their brains won't be quite as large. They won't have more difficulty time paying attention, not only when they're high, but when they're not high. It'll limit their verbal skills. And also, which is a big issue, it'll decrease their own self-regulatory, their self-control type behaviors. What we also notice is that 1 in 3 individuals who drink alcohol also are using cannabis at the same time. And the effects of the combination of alcohol and cannabis are exacerbated so much more than it would be for either one alone. Next. As I just mentioned, roughly 1 in 3 individuals who drink also use cannabis. So if we see 75% of teens by the time they reach their 12th grade drinking regularly, 1 in 3 of them are also using cannabis at the same time. Why do they do that? They want to get more high. They sometimes think it'll counteract effects of drinking, such as things like reduced spinning and headache, although that's not true. Sometimes, again, peer pressure, and also to change the effects. The number one factor that we found is if friends are doing it, it's most likely that the teens will do it. Next. So parents. So to this point, I've talked about the effects of drinking and harm. Let's talk about parents for a moment. Many parents, when we ask parents questions about what are their concerns, they say things like, I don't want my kid drinking and driving. I don't want them getting in a car with somebody who's impaired. I don't want them getting harmed, and I don't want them harming other people. So I asked them, okay, so given that you told us what your concerns are, what do you do to try and prevent those things from happening? And the number one thing that parents tell me is they talk to their kids. But just because it's the number one thing, there are still many, many parents that don't have these conversations. So I asked those parents, what are the reasons why? And one of the things that they do, and there's many assumptions, they say, it's too early to talk about it. My kid's not interested in drinking. And that's actually not consistent with the data. Almost 1 in 4 kids have tried alcohol by the time they're in their 8th grade. So it's not really too early to start communicating with them, even when they're younger than that. Another reason why they don't talk is they say things like, my child has learned about alcohol in school. And although many kids get exposed to alcohol in places like health classes or PE or presentations from people, many of the issues that we have learned that prevent them from drinking never get covered in school-based programs. There's also so much more competition for other things that are being taught that there just isn't enough time. Another reason is parents say my kid should know better. And the unfortunate reality is that kids are still younger and they're uninformed about it. They see people using alcohol and they don't recognize that it's a harmful drug. Also, from the science, we know that young people's brains aren't fully developed until they're in their mid to late 20s. And when we say that, we're talking about different centers of the brain. And I'll just share with you a little what we know. The center that gets developed first is the center that kind of affects our emotions. So we feel things like we feel happy and we feel sad and we feel anger and we feel frustrated. So we spend a lot of time with our emotions, and most younger people, they make their decisions based on how they feel. And that's an area of the brain, and self-control is not there quite yet developed. The other area of the brain that's really important in this developmental process is the sort of the frontal lobe, this area. And that's areas involved in decision making and judgment and so on. And it's the last one to be fully developed. So a lot of the feelings that people drive a lot of young people. So when parents say, why'd you do that? Usually say, I don't know. They're probably telling the truth. They probably just it was a feeling at the time and they gave into it. So parents could do a lot of things. The last one is parents try and involve their kids in activities. And by the way, I'm a parent and I do exactly the same thing. But what we realized about some of these activities, they become the next group of social groups that are more likely to influence our kids in sort of harmful ways as well. And so just because your kids are involved in different programs and school plays and school sports and things like that, community sports, that doesn't mean that they're not being exposed to these things and also being and having early initiation. Next. So parents. I've heard a lot of parents say to me, I don't really think that they're listening. And the data show that parents are really the number one influence on decisions that teens make, which comes as a surprise to many people. It's a little counterintuitive. A lot of teens also credit their parents for being the most important when they say, who's most important with you, with friends being a sort of a distant second. So I'll sort of say, parents, it's your chance to really make a difference and talk to them. MAD's done surveys on this about who's been doing this for quite some time. And it still seems to make the difference that parents are really important this way. So they do have an influence. The data from countless clinical trials that we've done looking at the effects of parents show their benefits. When parents communicate, their kids are less likely to drink and less likely to initiate than when they don't. Next. There are also myths involved about drinking and things that can be done that heard from parents. One of these is that in Europe, they're exposed to alcohol, and we call it the European model. Of course, people in Europe wish we stopped saying that, but the reality is in Europe they usually generally have lower drinking age than here in the United States. And I remember seeing a figure of number of individuals that had early onset alcohol type problems. And the figure showed the different countries in Europe, and it showed the United States. And despite the fact that we think we have a big drinking problem here in the US, our kids drink less often and less frequently and less likely to have problems than the kids in Europe that start at earlier ages. And so it's not actually accurate that because individuals start in Europe, they drink less and have less problems. There are a few countries in Europe where they don't have as much problems as others, but it's just not true. It's not based on facts that Europe does not have problems for teen drinking. The next one is parents often say, I'd rather if they're going to drink that they drink in our home. That way we can supervise them and keep an eye on them. And this comes from a lot of work that's been looked at to see, well, when parents are around, kids are more well behaved than when parents are not around. And there is some evidence to show that parents are really good in terms of being role models and stopping that from happening. However, what we've learned is that when kids are allowed to drink in their home in these sort of controlled settings, they often drink more often, more frequently, and heavier when they're not with their parents than when they are. And so even if they are drinking at home and parents are supervising it, it has really harmful effects when they're not at home. And so parents have to be mindful about thinking that this is a protective factor and a benefit. It's actually having counterintuitive effects. Again, kids drink more frequently, heavier, and more likely to experience consequences when they're not home. So what can parents and adults do? Next. First, be positive and start the conversation. And before I talk about what's on the slide, what I want to do is I want to speak about the materials that For Mothers Against Drunk Driving has available to parents to help them have these conversations. The Power of Parents for middle schoolers and high schoolers are designed, and they've been tested in the field on a national study, and the results have been published showing the benefits of them having an effect on drinking and riding with impaired drivers. So before I talk about anything, I encourage you to get a copy of the MAD's Power of Parents materials for middle school and high school youth. It also has material on talking to them not only about alcohol, but also about cannabis. And the information in those materials have been proven to be effective in scientific studies. So be positive, start this conversation. Talk to your kids in a communicative way that you share the conversation with them. So you ask them questions about how and what. And we've talked about asking questions with why. What you don't want is to ask questions that you get a yes or no type answer. You want to explore the reasons for things. So how do you think drinking affects choices people make? What problems do you think could happen if people choose to drink? Those are the kinds of questions with how and what that encourage an exchange of ideas. Next. The other thing that we've learned is that when there are rules and consequences about drinking, young people are less likely to drink. So parents need to set these rules and explain the reasoning behind them and establish what the consequences will be in advance and then enforce them. A lot of parents feel like they don't want to lose the communication and conversations with kids. But when we ask parents, what kind of things do you do in the home? The parents that set rules and then establish the consequence in advance and then enforce them, their kids are less likely to drink. They're less likely to drink heavier if they do consume alcohol, and they're less likely to experience consequences. So the sort of the idea that parents have that if I do this, then we'll lose them it's not supported by the data that show that if you do this, the kids are less likely to drink and less likely to have problems. Next. So what can communities do? So this is the end of my moment, and I'm going to pass the baton on to Dr. Ann Ray, Associate Professor at the University of Kentucky.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. I am thrilled to be here with you all to contribute to this conversation about how we can best support our teens and talk about what it means to think about prevention from a public health lens across different levels of education. And I'm going to kick this off today by talking about substance use prevention as our teens transition to college. I'm going to share a little bit about the work that I do here at UK, and then we'll circle back to K through 12 school prevention. All right, so first and foremost, college is a critical time to continue the conversation with your teens. So you're not done yet at this stage. In fact, you have a super important role to play. And one of the things I will share is that I have been studying campus substance use for as long as Rob has been at Penn State as one of his first doctoral students. And for the past 6 years, I've been working to address this issue at University of Kentucky, and from two angles. One, to both better understand patterns of use, and then how to prevent misuse and reduce risks that our youth face. And while there is evidence nationally of some positive downward trends in campus alcohol use over the past decade or so, it's still a major concern and quite prevalent, as you can see from the statistics I have on the slide. So we know at any given time, if we would do a survey of students on campus, about 1 in 2 drink any alcohol, and about 1 in 3 report binge drinking, which Dr. Turrisi talked a bit about some of the not so good effects of that. And of course, we see nationally quite a few negative outcomes of this, from academic consequences, assaults, deaths, and ultimately even meeting criteria for an alcohol use disorder based on student drinking patterns. So again, this really sets the stage for why is it so critical that we continue this conversation in college. When I was first talking with Michelle, who invited me along with Rob and Megan to be a part of this wonderful webinar today, one of the things she asked me is, talk about what it means to think about alcohol use from a public health perspective. And so what I'd like to share here is that what this means to me is acknowledging the multiple levels of influence on behaviors. And so if we think about teen substance use, this really starts with your teens themselves, right? At that innermost ring, how your teens think, how they feel, their personality, age, etc. It includes the interpersonal relationships, which is where you come in, your influence, their peers, other social networks. The next ring or layer is community influence. So if you think about your teen's environment, the school that they attend, do they work, go to church? What are these different community influences on their behavior? And then lastly, society, right? So things when we think about laws and policies that exist, underage drinking laws, et cetera. And what I always emphasize to my students here is this model or framework I'm showing you, or the circles that we're looking at. This perspective, we use this in two ways. One, to help understand why are some teens more or less likely to use substance use, but we also use it to guide our prevention efforts. So how do we prevent and change behavior? And a public health perspective really means that we need efforts at all of these layers of what we call our social ecological model. And so if we apply this framework to the issue of college student drinking specifically, what that means is that we need campuses to be thinking about prevention at each of these layers. And some good news is most colleges do this, right? They understand this importance, and they do indeed have programming that targets each ring. And again, I'm going to come back to you. You're still very much a part of this as parents. But at the individual level, most campuses offer some kind of education, whether it be online or in person. For example, first-year students must complete before registering for classes. And again, that's really targeting the thoughts and beliefs and education around this topic. Many campuses utilize work that Rob, Dr. Turrisi, has spearheaded, and utilize his college version of a handbook that really, again, skill builds and provides information and equips you with the confidence to have these important conversations. Many schools even have programs, we call them bystander intervention, that teach students how to be good peers. So what can you do when you're out if you see something happening to intervene and make sure that you keep your friends out of harm's way if you're at a party, for example. At that community level, it means offering things like alcohol-free late night activities and substance-free housing. And then for organizations that may tend to have more risk associated with them, offering extra prevention programming. So I always use fraternities and sororities as an example here of many campuses have extra programming that targets students in these orgs that can be associated with more risk. And then of course, at a campus level, the society here thinking about what are the campus policies around substance use? What programming exists if you violate that policy? And so again, this is the good news. Colleges really do care about your students. They put a lot of resources into trying to keep them safe. But we also know there's still more work to be done. And so I'm going to share just a little bit about the work that I do here at UK. And I will say as a scientist, what I am really interested in is really taking a step back and thinking about all those interlocking circles. After all we've learned over the past few decades as a team, as Rob shared, what's working? And also where can we improve, and how do we use the latest evidence to guide that? And so my current work is really focused on that innermost layer of the framework I shared with you. And it's data driven, right? And so by continuing to study campus behaviors, evaluate prevention efforts across the country, talking with students, talking with staff on campus, what have we learned, and where do I want to spend my time as a researcher? And so one thing that we've learned on college campuses in particular is that substance use tends to be linked to other risky behaviors. And so in college in particular, sexual risk-taking is one of those. So we know the research shows that when students drink, this tends to be associated with increases in hooking up or having sex with casual partners, being less likely to use condoms. And this combination of these behaviors not only can lead to some negative health outcomes, but it also is a pathway to sexual victimization. And so prevention here, kind of taking into account multiple behaviors, is super important. Another thing that we know when thinking about campus prevention is that first-year students are particularly vulnerable. So I've spent most of my career studying this specific subpopulation of college students in particular. We know also that technology is a great way to deliver programming. One, because it's efficient. It's a way to get messaging out to large masses of students. We also know students like it, right? They've grown up with technology, and this is a great way for them to receive prevention. But we also know that there's room for improvement. And so while technology delivered programming is popular, it doesn't work as well as if we could take every single first-year student, sit them down one-on-one with a trained counselor, and kind of talk about their experience with alcohol use and really plant some seeds for change. We know if we had unlimited resources, that would maybe be the best thing that we could do. It's just not reality. And so a lot of my work is motivated to kind of take into account this latest evidence and think about how can we use technology to sort of better approximate the impact of if we could talk with students one-on-one. And so I'm not going to share too much, but there's a figure on the screen that shows a program that me and my research team are currently working on, where we're trying to do just this. We're trying to take the education that many students or many campuses provide to students and make it better by offering an interactive, engaging experience. And so what we're going to be studying here at UK this fall is an app that allows students to be engaged and really be thinking about their health behaviors across pretty much the bulk of the first semester on campus. And so they're going to get prompted to track their behaviors, to monitor them through an interface where they can report each day if they're drinking, using cannabis, hooking up, and share the experiences that they're having on those occasions. And then once a week, they are going to get custom detailed feedback that really describes, here's what you told us about your behavior this week. Here's what you shared. These are the experiences you're having. And they're also going to get to see what's sort of what we call normative on campus and be able to compare themselves to what other students are doing. We know that's a particularly effective way of sharing messaging and prevention on campus, because oftentimes what students think is, oh, everybody else is doing this a lot more than I am. And for students who do choose to drink or use cannabis or hook up or blend all of those together, typically what we see is they're really overestimating what's happening on campus as a whole. And if we can share that with them in real time, this should hopefully help to change their behaviors. And then seeing their trends over time will really approximate what we would do if we were meeting one-on-one, where we could say, okay, how's it been going? Let's think about your behavior over time and how things are working, and really be able to help them kind of reflect and see that, goodness, on those weeks when I'm drinking a lot more, I'm noticing my list of these not so good experiences are a lot longer. So that's a little bit about me and the work that I'm doing here at UK on those individual level prevention factors, and launching this fall. Excited, hopefully we'll have some results of this type of programming soon. And then the last thing that I want to kind of circle back to and share with you all goes back to what Michelle asked me. I work in college primarily, but as a public health professional, I think it's really important and critical that we're thinking about, again, layering evidence-based prevention across not just college, but multiple levels of education. And so when I talk with anyone about what can you do, if I had, the floor to say, this is the most critical thing, I think for me, from a public health angle, and what, again, I impart to my students who are going to be the ones out in the communities thinking about the solutions to addressing substance misuse among teens, it's what does the evidence say? And I think we've sent that message quite a bit today. So number one, what I encourage schools to think about is what you're choosing to put your resources towards evidence-based. Does the science support what you're doing? And one of my favorite things about public health is we work really hard to make sure that our lessons that we learn are out there, that schools have the capacity or hopefully the availability to go and search for these, to talk with experts and really have a good understanding of what are those programs that exist. So that's number one. That's what I would want to know as a parent when I think about my own daughters who are in middle and high school. What are their schools choosing to do? The second thing is that supports or complements, if you will, the importance of implementing evidence-based interventions is what we sometimes use, or as researchers, we say a lifespan perspective or a developmental perspective. And what I mean by that is we need prevention that targets development, and we need prevention across all those layers. I wish I could say there was one magic solution that, well, if you just talk about this at this time, everything's going to be okay. But I think as everyone's alluded to already in this webinar, it's really critical that we layer prevention at all of these stages. And then what we're talking about has to match that developmental level. And so in elementary school, we're talking about more formative foundation building aspects of, improving your parent-child relationships, building your youth's social emotional learning. Many schools focus on programs that do this. In middle school, getting more specific about those conversations, building those refusal skills so when they face peer pressure, they understand and feel confident about how to respond in those situations, giving accurate information on substance use. And then in the spirit of this webinar in high school, parents are really that number one go-to resource. So I want to thank everyone for the chance to kind of share a little bit about what we can do at a school level. And on that note, I'm going to turn it back over to Operation Parent to talk a little bit more about resources for you all.
These are just a few of the national organizations that we love. Megan, I think you were going to cover this slide. Am I right? Sorry.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Michelle.
Yes,
as Michelle mentioned, these are just a very small number of the national organizations that Mothers Against Drunk Driving works with on not only the underage substance use prevention side, but also on all of our prevention work. So the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, Smart Approaches to Marijuana, NIAAA, as well as state traffic and highway safety offices throughout the country. And last but certainly not least on this list is responsibility.org. So each and every one of these entities has been and continues to be great partners and resources for us in the work that we do. And again, this is just a very small tidbit of the number of partners that we work with throughout the country. So as briefly mentioned earlier, and I want to share as well, Mothers Against Drunk Driving, thanks to the work with Dr. Turrisi and many other partners, are thrilled to be able to provide our underage substance use prevention programming at no charge to our communities, which includes all of the above. As mentioned, Power of Parents, which we are honored to have our national presenting sponsor nationwide support us in our work there. We have handbooks that are available both in print and electronically that, thanks to funding actually recently from General Motors, we have been able to update and to give some not only new information, but then also in a new form that we will be releasing next week. So more to come on that. But with that being said, again, these handbooks are available to any parents or caring adults at no charge. So if there's interest, please reach out to your local office, contact me, and we are happy to get those resources for you. In addition, we have our other underage substance use prevention programs, as mentioned, which includes Power of Me. Power of Me is our elementary school-based programming for 4th and 5th graders, where we come in and we can do it either classroom style or auditorium style, where we start the conversation on alcohol, because we know that this is an age where they're starting to see alcohol in their everyday life and recognize it. So we talk about the importance of the developing brain and protecting their brain, as well as have tips and tricks, if you will, to be able to protect themselves if they are ever in an unfortunate situation where they are in a vehicle with an impaired driver. So what they can do to keep themselves safe if they are put in that situation, because at that age, most don't have the ability or courage to be able to address that with an adult. So, and then in addition, we have Power of Youth, which is our middle school and high school based programming. Same thing, where we can do it classroom style or auditorium style, whatever works best for the school or the community event. And with these, both are tailored to the specific audiences, where we're really starting to have that conversation on what alcohol and other substances do to the brain, to include cannabis, as well as prescription drug misuse. So really starting to introduce them to that, educated, and giving them the ability not only to say no, but then also to be a peer support to one another as they go through their middle school and high school years. And again, last but certainly not least, we have our Mad Promposal for our juniors and seniors ahead of prom, as well as our Mad Spirit Homecoming program for all age levels in the high school space. This is a classroom-based program, as well as it could be used for auditorium. But what makes these stand out and very different are their interventions, again, being done just a week, sometimes a few days, right ahead of these big events that take place during their high school careers. But they include the use of fatal vision goggles. So there's an activity that includes that research-based tool that is able to give them a level of interaction right ahead of these important events. And again, continuing that message of, again, never drinking underage, but also never to get into a vehicle with an impaired driver. So if there's any interest in bringing these to your schools, please contact us. And again, we will have all of these resources available to you, not only if you're able to contact the local offices, but then also we will have them on our website.
When Megan and I first started to this is a great time, audience, to submit your questions as we're gearing up for those. But as Megan and I started to talk about working on this webinar together, it was spurred from the Power of Parents being updated. And it's such a great resource to begin with. And Dr. Turrisi's research in there is so solid and amazing. But I love now that it's available in an audiobook format. I always love a good audiobook. And then also the medication misuse, additional information in there. But the layout is incredible, the graphics. I really love the conversation prompt starters and how the section on how to help teens make good choices, how to help them make good choices and deal with peer pressure. Getting ahead of all those things are just so important, and increasing their self-esteem. There's just, every page is additional information to help parents get a really strong start to the school year. And then talking about problem solving. So Dr. Turrisi has a really great thing that he talks about always, is helping them with their plan B. And I'm sure he'll talk about that in the question section. But that's something that I learned from him and I used in my own home too, is always thinking ahead about, what's your plan B you're going to do to make sure that you're safe. And if the tide shifts, as it often does when you are dealing with teenage plans, how are you going to get to a safe plan? So welcome back, everybody. Thank you so much for all of your knowledge and things that you've shared with us so far. Now we're on to we're getting on to one of our most favorite parts of the presentation as well, the question section. So Anne, I think before we do that, you were going to say a bit about the parent handbook.
Sure. I had the opportunity also to check out what Operation Parent has put together across a wide range of topics. And so I think, just highlighting all the resources that are available out there. One of the things I just really like is just the breadth of topics, I think, that are covered. Obviously, you've heard a lot about resources specific to substance use today on this webinar, which makes a lot of sense given the topic, but I think across public health topics that are relevant for youth populations. This is another great tool for your toolkit.
Today we're spotlighting our middle and high handbook and it perfectly fits with today's information and gives caregivers practical conversation starters, updated facts on tough topics, how to age appropriately discuss them. So here's some of our suggestions. Talk early and often, and then I always say talk again, even when you think you've covered it all. Be honest about your family history. This is something we haven't talked about much yet. If it's alcohol and addiction in the family, don't shy away from that. Make sure any alcohol in your home is accounted for, even locked up, and get to know your child's friends and caregivers. I always say you usually know right away. Your mom radar might go off if your child is around friends when they're not acting themselves. So that's a good time to ask some questions and get the conversation open. We know that our handbooks are a life-saving resource covering today's toughest topics like social media, substance use, opioids, and mental health. They're perfect for all caregivers, whether you're a parent, a foster, or a grandparent. You can click this pop-up and learn more about our Middle High, which is available in English, Spanish, and Christian editions. And then also you're going to find great information about our elementary handbooks and get free shipping. I encourage you to grab one for yourself and maybe for a friend or neighbor, someone that's in your child's tribes. This is our TNT, Trends in Training. It's for 5th to 9th graders. It's a high energy event with the purpose of teaching evidence-based drug facts while equipping students with very important refusal skills. In our community, we hosted all of our middle schools and middle schoolers and their parents. We were 400 strong on a gorgeous Saturday, and we had the opportunity to just dig in and really talk about drug facts, but more importantly, how to refuse them. So you can use this little pop-up to learn more if that program is intriguing to you. We invite you to follow us on our growing social media communities, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and YouTube, and share our information with your communities. You also have one more opportunity to register for the upcoming webinars. Okay, Dr. Turrisi, here's our first question of the day. What should the messaging be when parents use socially and kids may wonder why parents drink and why they are?
Thanks, Michelle. Can you say that again?
I'm just making sure you heard the question. Okay, we're getting some feedback. Would you need me to repeat it?
Yeah. There's been a couple of questions on the interaction board. The first one is, what should the messaging be when parents use alcohol socially? Kids may wonder why parents drink and they're not allowed. This comes up often, and I think it's incumbent on the parent to be able to understand how to say that. I think when I was growing up, parents said, because you're a kid and you're not allowed. And that didn't really help me understand that process. So what have we learned? What are the reasons why young people are not allowed to drink relative to adults? The first one is that young people, their brains and actually most of their bodies are developing at a different phase. And so again, we didn't have the science, but we now have the science that we know that the brain is in development. And so alcohol for a developing brain is going to be more harmful on the brain development than it is going to be for an adult whose brain is developed. So that would be one of the reasons why that's the case. The second reason is that younger people are much, much more likely, if they initiate alcohol earlier, to develop an alcohol use disorder. And some people might know that term, not be familiar with that term. That's what we used to call alcohols. Now we have a different set of disorders that we've identified, and we call it alcohol use disorder. And so the data showing that early initiation, that is before the age of 21, the earlier that an individual starts drinking alcohol, the more likely they're going to have a lifetime alcohol use disorder. Alcohol use disorders are very difficult to treat. They're very expensive. So a single alcohol use disorder will cost the United States millions of dollars through the lifetime of the individual. And so early onset increases the number of people that have that. Also, young people are developing socially. That means they're learning how to interact with like a young adult, if you will, or a teenager. And they're also developing cognitively. That means they're able to think and make decisions and form opinions about things that are based upon facts. They're also developing morally as to what's right and wrong still for quite some time. And they're developing physically, and they're able to do this. Alcohol does not have positive effects on developing emotionally, developing physically, developing cognitively, or developing morally. And so there's these reasons why young people and mixing alcohol in their lives at that time are not good. The other thing is, none of us are advocating that they should never ever have the ability to drink a glass of wine or something like that. So it's just a temporary delay. It's a postponement, if you will. And we know from the data that the longer we delay that initiation and onset, the healthier they'll be. And that's probably primarily the issue about why should adults have access to alcohol but young people not? Because they don't have the same kind of damage for the development that they'll face. When we look at crime, when we look at problems, consequences, when an adult drinks alcohol, again, in moderate amounts, they're much less likely to have a sexual assault than a teen that drinks alcohol, and so on. And Anne pointed out some of these things. So it's not simply a matter of age, but rather development, and then the issues about being safe and being protected. So that's it. And then about whether they'd rather do it or home, I kind of answered in my presentation, but I'll state this again.
Dr. Turrisi, I was going to throw one to Megan.
Sure.
Megan, so you were just touching on it too, Dr. Turrisi, about having a drink of wine or a beer at an afternoon barbecue, glass of wine with dinner, that many kids that I work with have parents and caregivers that drink and drive. How does MAD encourage parents to talk about that with their teens? And
it's all about being a positive role model for your children. And we talk about that, how, children are always watching their parents as well as parents watching their children. So we need to be positive role models. So, if you were to go out and have a glass of wine with dinner, you may not be over the legal limit, but your children are still watching and seeing that role model behavior and seeing that it's providing almost a rite of passage in their child's mind. So, when you're going to dinner and when you're with your children and with your kids and you're driving that evening, we tell parents, be that role model and have something that's a non-alcoholic beverage to really model that behavior when it comes to going out.
Dr. Turrisi, one of our attendees asked, where can they find the data on the European versus American alcohol consumption, or just do some additional reading about that?
So the material that we covered, myself and Dr. Ray, primarily comes from several sources. And these are professional medical and behavioral science or neuroscience journals. And so the information about, can you repeat your question about where they would go? What are they looking for?
They are looking for, let's see. Oh, European versus American drinking model.
That's usually in a couple of different places. It's a complicated question because what you have to do is you have to look at the rates of drinking in Europe, right? And then you have to look at the rates of drinking in the United States and compare those two places. So the place, if you want to peek at the rates of drinking in the United States, one of the best sources is the Modern in the Future Project. And they do annual surveys of youth at different ages. And so it's easy to look at that information and go there. And then in Europe, you also have different countries doing annual rates of alcohol consumption. So it's not like this is going to be in one place where you can just go ahead and read about it. You'd have to read about the data that's going on in Europe, and you'd have to read about the data that's going on in the US, and then you'd have to compare those two. But they're usually accessible online, and the best places in the US, again, I mentioned the Modern Future. You'll generally see data from the Modern Future reported on the National Institute on Alcohol Abuse and Alcoholism's website, as well as CDC, although I haven't checked the links to see if the CDC are still available for people to go and get that data. So when we talk about these things, we've spent countless hours trying to pull that stuff together for projects that we do. It's not at the fingertips and easy to go and get. But I have slides, and I could share those with Megan, and Megan can share those with people if she wants to.
Yeah, I'll just echo what Rob said about tapping into resources where all this legwork has been done for you, so that you don't necessarily have to be the individual person combing through the journal articles and the research and the statistics published by different countries to do that yourself. And so Rob mentioned the CDC and the National Institute on Alcohol Abuse and Alcoholism websites, and most of these resources that Megan and Michelle shared earlier, if you have resources dedicated to underage drinking and having these conversations. And so, when I'm trying to talk to an audience such as yourselves, tap into these resources that are there at your fingertips. That's not to discourage you from doing the research as well, but so many people have really worked hard to compile this information for you to make it easy.
Yeah, that's actually, thank you, Anne, for making that point. The Power of Parents materials is exactly that. And so, and the parent handbooks that we've done and that are being disseminated to colleges and universities and communities throughout is exactly that. It's a compilation of the information from medical journals, science journals, government documents, to make it easier for parents to have these conversations. If they were to go and comb the journals and comb these sites to gather this data for them, I'm going to tell you, it takes us hours and hours and days and weeks and months when we put together a project proposal. So that's the reason why we've tried to develop these things so they wouldn't have to.
To hear from each of you on this next question. What are your expert and good suggestions for combating living in an area where cannabis dispensaries are everywhere?
That's a community policy decision-making process. What they allow and what they don't allow. And so until communities regulate the number and amount of those in their communities, they probably will grow. Just like there's, hundreds of sub shops in the place that I live. Like you can't not run into a sub shop if you're in the town that I live in. And we also have different dispensaries and things like that. And it's incumbent upon the communities to regulate that.
Yeah, good point. We also had a mom on the call that says she has a 14-year-old who's extremely curious about the CBD shops, and the vapes are getting her attention as well. So what would you say as a parent who's wanting to speak to your kids about that in your own home?
I think what Anne has talked about just earlier, and then what I've echoed back, which is that it's an opportunity for parents to communicate, and having the tools like you're talking about that you're providing and what Mothers Against Drunk Driving is providing allows you to have a conversation with your kids about this. I don't want to say this is that different than when we were younger and grew up and there were cigarette machines all over the place. They look like candy machines, right? And these vape shops look very exciting. There's a lot of colors and there's lights, and it looks, they make it so that people want to walk in and explore it. That's their job, right? They're selling a product to people. And so they're not going to make it look drab and boring and dull. They're going to try and entice people to pop in and look at things like that. And so, yes, it makes a lot of sense that the people are going to look and say, what's that store? And a parent, it's their job to be able to say, this is what's sold at that store. This is what it, and another way that my rule is, we all go to see our doctors, and we have children raising our kids. We're constantly at the doctors for something or other. How many doctors recommend that their kids go inside a cannabis store or a vape shop? You usually don't get those recommendations. Like, in other words, it was healthy for us, our doctors, when we visit them and say, how many times have you been to the vape shop? It should help you. For the fact that they're not recommending it says something. Whereas they try and recommend that we eat a balanced diet and we exercise, right? And things like that. They're not recommending visiting our vape shop.
Megan, you're in the prevention field also, like many on the call. What are some of the things that you say to your children at home in terms of avoiding alcohol and CBD?
Well, at this point, my children are in their 30s almost, and one's in their late 20s. So I think Dr. Ray would be well suited for dealing with this right now.
Yeah, I was throwing that to Megan. Sorry, the sound is a little
okay.
bit off. Yeah, I was throwing that to Megan. Yeah.
You know, I think fortunately, I would say for my children, the conversation started very early, obviously, with having a 14-year-old, nearly 12-year-old, and a 9-year-old at home and working with the organization for 17 years. Their life has been surrounded by Mothers Against Drunk Driving and our mission and all the mission work that we do. So it is constant conversations, and especially with my oldest Cole, as he's in high school this year, which is, again, so hard to believe for me, but really starting to have those conversations and letting him know, you know, you're going to start going out with friends and there's going to be some temptations, and just always have that constant reminder for him and continuing those conversations any opportunity that I can.
And
Yeah, I'll echo a lot of what Megan said, as I have a 12 and a 15-year-old, and these conversations started a long time ago. And this is a serious topic, but I'll joke that even when my 15-year-old was 4, I'm sitting around the dinner table talking about writing research articles on drinking games, and I would hear her talking about drinking games in our house. Hopefully, you know, again, in a she didn't know what she was saying, but so. Early, right? This is something that we've been talking about in our household from a very early age. And I think that age appropriate part, right, is so critical. And so for me, one of the things that was really helpful is both of my daughters in their health class had a unit on substance use. And so that was a great segue for me as a parent to kind of naturally complement or piggyback off of what they were learning. So it didn't just sound like one more conversation of me bringing up the work that I do. And I joke about that, but they obviously understand the work I do. We do talk about it a lot as a habit of being in this field. But I think for me, that's one tip that I love, which is trying to think about whether they're going out for an event on the weekend or they're covering a unit in school. What are those moments that you can kind of sneak in or use to kind of spearhead that conversation? I find that to be something that's way more helpful than just, okay, it's 7 o'clock, let's talk about, you know, alcohol use again and what you should and should not be doing. So finding those ways to make it a more natural conversation that sort of vibes with whatever's happening in their life at the moment.
Excuse me, Michelle, can I add one thing to that?
Of
I
course.
agree with what Megan said. I completely agree with what Ann said. Some of our studies have also shown that it's never too late. So even for parents that haven't got the chance to start early and talk often, the benefit of communicating at any point in time, and even into the early 20s, has been shown to be effective. So for the parent that says, "Oh, that train's left the station," the beauty of that is the trains come back to the station frequently. So it's still an opportunity to have those conversations, and the evidence shows they benefit.
That's such a great point. I mean, we were all talking at the beginning of the call about the college campuses and all the students coming back, and just because they've gone off to college, the conversations can't stop. You have to keep them coming. There's a whole nother set of issues, and like we were talking about all the home opening football games this weekend, and talking with your college students. I have 2 of those about continuing to make safe choices, all the way through. So good. A caller was also wanting you to talk about in high school, middle school as well, keeping your children active and busy, and what you feel like how that can be a protective factor.
Is that going to Anne?
I was thinking you first, Dr. Turrisi.
So I keep on shifting to Anne because she's the one that really has explored some of these things. All right, so I mentioned it earlier, but getting students involved in sports and activities gives them something to do. And those are great things to do. We should never discourage them from trying to take interest in things and doing things. But we shouldn't hide the fact that those are social opportunities that can go positive or they can go negative. One of the things that we encourage to reduce the impact of peer pressure is to have multiple social groups. In other words, if you only have one set of friends and all your friends are going out and wanting to party, then if you don't go with them, you don't have friends. And that can be really difficult for a young person to abandon their friends. But if they have several sets of peers from several different activities, it's a little easier for them to maybe say, okay, I'm going to step away and not do this one. And that's a place where parents could encourage interest that not just have the same set of friends that do the same things all the time, but rather do different things so that they have the ability to be able to still have friends and still have a social life, even if one set of friends are doing things that they don't want to do.
Great advice. Great advice. I want to thank each of you for being here today and the resources that you have brought with us. I want to thank Amanda for keeping us, our technology running smooth, and the graphic design that she's done on the presentation today. She asked me to also remind the audience to check out the handouts, and that the one specifically about the MAD resources has links that will take you to each of the programs that Megan described beautifully here in the presentation. And so we invite you to check out all of those resources along with everything else that Anne, Dr. Turrisi, Megan. We hope that you'll spend some time thinking about it and just teeing up your conversations and getting those ready for just a really strong back to the school year and having great conversations about how to stay safe. So thanks to each of you, Megan and Dr. Turrisi. We appreciate everything that you're doing in the prevention world, and we look forward to keeping in touch.
Well, thank you, Michelle and Amanda. It's been incredible. We appreciate all the support and the opportunity to share our programs and resources to parents and caring adults, and look forward to continuing our partnership.
Keep up the strong work, everybody.
Thank you, Michelle. Thank you, Amanda.
Thank you.